Hello and welcome to Stowe Talks, a podcast designed to support people going through a relationship breakdown and all the challenges this brings. I'm Matthew Taylor.
And I'm Liza, family lawyers at Stowe Family Law. And today we are joined by special guest Ceri Griffiths, a divorce financial planner, as we look at how to deal with pensions as part of the divorce settlement. So to start us off, Ceri, can you just give us a bit of background as to what you do, why you do it, who you help?
Yeah, absolutely. So I work exclusively with women who are divorcing CEOs. So I'm really specialist in what I'm doing. But I will be talking today more generally. I have been a financial planner for over 20 years and I hold every pension exam that you can hold within the financial planning world. So we're in safe hands here. And I work exclusively with women who are divorcing CEOs, as I said, but specifically where I'm working with women, I'm trying to get them to a place where we're removing vulnerability and disadvantage. So a lot of the work I do is around education, around making sure that everybody is on the same level and can approach their divorce negotiations from a really informed place.
Okay, so before we deal into the real extreme nerd stuff, which I am very excited about as a self-confessed pensions nerd, and Lisa might not call herself a nerd because she's a bit cooler than me, but loves the pension as well. Before we get into that, really interested to hear about this education piece that you go through. What are, with your clients and people that you've worked for before, and particularly if they're divorcing someone who's wealthy and got the assets, what's the attitude and the mindset towards pensions on divorce?
I think culturally, the kind of mindset towards pensions is they're complicated, they're difficult, and they aren't particularly useful for me. So that's often a really kind of common starting place. And I love to say that pensions are your gift to your future self because they are really important in how you're going to live your retirement. And the more that we can focus and kind of get those working for you, the better that part of your life's going to look. So I think mindset is often not in the right place, and certainly knowledge not necessarily in the right place either. Pensions have had so many reforms, and it's understandable why people haven't necessarily got the clarity. And when it comes to pensions on divorce, that's been an absolute kind of minefield, and does need expertise, both legally and financially. There are some really complicated aspects of pensions on divorce that need experts looking at them. So it is something that really requires the right people on your side.
Right at the beginning, then, somebody coming to visit you or coming to visit us, I mean, one of the first things we'll ask them to do is go away and get what we call a cash equivalent value for their pension. So can you delve into the values of pensions a little bit more as to what the cash equivalent means? Is it accurate? Do they need to be looking at anything else?
Yeah, a really good starting point to understand how you might get a settlement that works for you is by understanding what assets are on the table to start with. And pensions are a big part of that. So if you hold any pensions, reaching out to the pension providers and asking them for a valuation is an initial step. And that can literally be a phone call, it can be an email. If you position with them that you are going through divorce, you'll get a little bit more information that goes along with that. But as a starting point, just essentially finding out the values of those is a really good place to be. There are two main types of pension, and that's significant when we get these values. The typical pension that you will have if you are paying in directly yourself and it's not through an employer is called a money purchase scheme. And then if you are paying in through your employer, but it's not a huge employer, you're not working for the government or for the NHS or a really kind of established employer, the chances are you're going to have one of these money purchase or defined contribution pensions. And that's significant because the values that we get back for those are typically accurate. They typically give us a clear picture of how much is in those pension pots. Those pensions, essentially, the amount you contribute gets invested, and whatever it's growing at that particular time has a value. So it's just an investment with a good tax wrapper on it. That's all it is, essentially. So those ones give us a good indication. There are some caveats to that because some of those pensions do have a little bit of quirk with them. They might have some guarantees. They might have some kind of extra amounts that we can take tax-free. But in general, they'll give us kind of a true value. And then the other type of pension is called a defined benefit or a final salary pension. And you typically will get these if you are working for the government, the NHS, the fire service, or a really big established employer. You know, some of the big banks still have these. They are unusual to have if you're starting with an employer now, but it might be that you or your ex has them from years ago. They are not likely to represent the right figure when we get a valuation from those. They're more complicated to value. The way that these pensions work is that you might still contribute to them, you might still pay in monthly, but your amount that you're going to get when you retire isn't based on how much you've put in or how much your employers put in. What it's based on is how long you've worked there, and you are going to get a guaranteed income in your retirement. That's super valuable. Like, a really great thing to know is, like, I know exactly how much I'm going to get in retirement. It does make valuing them particularly difficult, though. And when we get a value back from those types of schemes, we know that we probably cannot use it and rely heavily on it. And we're going to need to do some extra work. And that's where we probably would get some pension reports, some actuary reports.
So if it gets fired out to an actuary report and you have maybe one party's got a defined contribution scheme, one party's got a defined benefit scheme, and you can't compare them directly because the values aren't in the same language, I guess.
Yes, go way of putting it.
Yeah. So how do we convert those? What information do we need to be able to kind of assess them on like terms? How does that work with the defined benefit scheme?
So the actuary normally does that bit of language translation for us, and it wouldn't be typical that a financial planner or your lawyer would sit down and compare those two. We would normally instruct actuary to look at those schemes, consider what the other benefits are that come with those schemes. Part of the reason that they're difficult to value is that they do have this guarantee of income, but they also have other aspects to the scheme that are valuable, such as death in service can be part of it as well. The tax-free cash element can be important as well. So it's going to take somebody a number of hours to analyse those benefits and then translate them into a figure. And we will use the actuary report to not only give us a figure to compare to the defined contribution scheme, but also to give us some clarity around what kind of split would give us an equal income in retirement.
And is that what we're looking for ordinarily? Would you suggest, as a financial planner, we're looking for equality of income in retirement? And how does that differ from just kind of splitting the pensions, looking at the values and splitting them, say 50-50?
Yeah, it is generally equality of income in retirement based on your age, how long you've got left to retirement. Then the equality of income, kind of splitting it from in terms of equality of capital and splitting in terms of the lump sum, will be quite different. So there was a report done in 2019, and that's given us all quite a lot of guidance. The Pensions Advice Group put together a report that gives us the kind of concept of what it is we're aiming to achieve, which is about both parties being able to approach their retirement with some clarity around them having an equal amount of income. That's a fair place to start. It doesn't necessarily mean that that's the right place, and actually that's quite a legal consideration, I would say, is that you guys would look at all the other things that could be impacting on what fair outcome would be there. But it's a good way to analyze the situation so that from a legal perspective you can then find out what path to go down. The other thing that will really come up in those reports is if it is decided that rather than sharing the pension, there would be a need to offset. So actually one party might have a need to have a different set of assets from the marriage, and that typical one would be if one party needs to stay in the family home, and therefore an exploration around maybe having less pension to stay in the family home could occur. Those reports typically will give us some guidance about how we do that, because it's not pound for pound. You can't just say for every pound of pension I'll have a pound of equity in the house. They give us the calculations for that as well.
I think that's a really common kind of thought process at the start, this trade-off of I'll keep the house, you keep your pension, is something that we see a lot. I'd be interested to know your thoughts, and yours too, Lisa, actually, from the sort of legal side of things, because obviously we're coming at things from two perspectives here: the financial side, the planning side that you deal with, Ceri, and the legal side as to how we apply the laws, we anticipate the courts would apply the law to reach that fairness. You used the word fairness, which is exactly right. So, and Ceri, and then maybe Lisa, what's your reaction when someone comes to you and says, "Oh yeah, he can keep the pension, I'll keep the house"? What what does that make your heart rate do?
So for me, the first thing is I'm thinking, thank goodness you're sitting in front of me, because I think it's a question that needs to be answered. It's not a statement, and it's something that needs to be explored. So it's kind of, okay, right, if we do that, what does it actually look like? And how does that play out not only today, but in the long run? And making sure that somebody who's deciding that is doing it from a really informed place, I think is key. So how I go about that with clients, and how most divorce financial planners go about that with clients, is really making sure your client understands, if they choose the house over the pension, what that means in terms of their outgoings now and their income now, and what that means in terms of the outgoings and their incomes in retirement. If you don't know what those are going to be, you're not in a position to make that decision. And so you need to know, how much am I going to have to live on now? How much am I going to have to live on retirement if I choose to do this? Exploring the house point of view is actually really interesting, because you'll probably find this when you're working with a client, their views and their priorities can kind of evolve during the divorce. And that sense of security that often comes up, and the desire to have some consistency for the children, that can evolve as well, and sometimes has to, and sometimes it's because of choice. But when we analyze staying in the home, and we really properly analyze it, and we think about, okay, this is what the legal team are telling us your situation is likely to be, and let's cost that out properly and really think about it, often it creates a lifestyle that is far less than they would be wanting to live. And when we consider an alternative, and we just think, okay, what if we did just downsize slightly? How does that look? Can you afford to heat the house, particularly now with the cost of living crisis? Realistically, what are you going to have left each month? And is that what you want? And exploring that in some depth. There is always the option, and one of the big parts of work that I do is always the option of downsizing in the future and then supplementing your retirement income. So they're questions to ask of a divorce financial planner. What we'll be able to do is help you visualize that, actually show you specifically, okay, if you stayed in the house, this is what life would look like, this is how much you're going to have left, this is what you can afford to do. If you downsized in the future, this is what your retirement could do. If you actually took as a full pension share, this is what it looks like. And you can just explore what they feel like and whether or not that is actually what you want it to be. And you can have some really challenging conversations as well with your divorce financial planner, because it's a safe space. It's not a legal space. I can actually have some conversations with them, knowing full well that they could say to me, actually, my outgoings are a little bit different to what I've put there, and I'm not compromised. I don't have to kind of be massively concerned about that. I can just say, okay, let's just tweak it. What is it, and how do we make this really kind of reflect where you are?
So if I had a client coming to me and saying that they wanted to immediately offset the pension against the house, I think the first thing to say would be to go and speak to a financial advisor and get some financial advice on it. And also, because I think you're quite right, Ceri, it's all about making informed choices, and it's knowing the impact of those choices. And there is often a lot of emotion tied to the family home, particularly at the beginning. And particularly if there are children involved, in a feeling that we don't want to unsettle the children anymore, and almost sometimes an over priority on maintaining this house at all costs. So it is very much making sure that we do see what the alternatives would be, because actually downsizing to a slightly smaller property but having that pension income and security in the future might make everybody happier. So yeah, I think it's definitely about making informed choices, making sure that they've got all of the information, making sure that if they're offsetting, we've got that actuary report, so that we've got the precise calculations for offsetting, and we're not just saying, oh, well, like you said, pound for pound, we'll just take £50,000 from the pension and we'll just have that from the house instead. We're going to need precise figures on that. And also those questions around how are you going to fund your retirement? And I think there's been a big shift that I've experienced, certainly in the last 10 years, with offsetting was far more common about 10 years ago, far more common than it is now. And I think there is a genuine worry these days that pension ages are getting longer. Do we want to be, can we work till 67? Is it going to be 67 by the times that we get to retirement age? Are we going to be expected to work to 70 or later? And if those are things where actually no, we don't, we need to make sure that we have the pension income there, and giving that up could actually be a really huge sacrifice.
And it goes back to what you were talking about before, Ceri, with the valuations. Is sometimes people will say, "Oh, I've got this C value, and my husband's NHS pension is worth £100,000, and there's £100,000 of equity in the family home, so I should keep that," and not realizing that these values are illusory and they aren't going to work because the actuarial work's not been done. So that's, I think, is one of the big problems on pension.
Yeah, and Matt, can I just say, I think that's one of the biggest fears I have when clients don't have a legal team or a financial team involved. And with no fault divorce and kind of the opportunity to do things really amicably and kind of between yourselves, that's one of my biggest fears, is that if that happens and nobody touches them legally or financially, that bit of knowledge isn't there. It does look like on paper that that's a really sensible thing to do, and seeking some legal advice, even if things are absolutely amicable, is always worth doing.
Yeah, absolutely. And all the stats suggest that it is women who are worst affected by this. There is a gender gap in pensions, as there is a gender income gap, and that's actually exacerbated on divorce. So is that part of the sort? Is that, I presume you can see where that comes from, given your sort of clients and the conversations that you go through.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's about making this information more widely available. I'm really passionate at making sure that everybody is aware that there are these little red flags that they need to just go and dig into. So it's not about everybody being a pension expert, but like if you're getting divorced, just kind of having in the back of your mind, oh, I need to go and find out a little bit more about these valuations. It's not as straightforward as it first seems.
So if you decide not to offset, and perhaps we should take a little step back and go through a little bit of the mechanics for someone who's saying, well, if I'm not keeping the house, I'm getting the pension. How does that work? What do you get? What do you get if you're looking to claim someone's pension?
So you typically get one of two options. You'll typically get a pension share, or you'll get an attachment order or earmarking. And 99% of the time these days it's a pension share. So the pension share means that you physically own your part of the pension. So let's say you're awarded 50%, let's keep it straightforward, 50% of that pension then physically becomes yours. I'm just going to quickly just go through the other options so we can park it, which is the earmarking or attachment order. And in that you'd actually become have a little part of your ex's pension sectioned off for you, but the decisions that they're making around their pension would still impact on you, and therefore it's not a popular choice, and pension sharing is the far more popular choice.
There's also the issue of death as well, isn't there? So if they were to die, their pension then dies with them and your income from that pension stops,
which is a huge impact. So we rarely see those. With the pension share, you then have an option typically about where you put it. You may be given the option to leave your pension with the existing provider, and that could happen with these large schemes that I'm talking about, the defined benefit or the final salary schemes, and there can be some massive advantages to doing so, because you can still benefit from a lot of the conditions, a lot of the guarantees that come with those pensions. So that needs exploration. Unfortunately, they normally say, take it away, get it away, because it's easier for them. And so they say, take it away, go and put it somewhere else. So you basically end up needing to find a home for your new share of pension, and exploring where that can go. And how you do that is with a financial advisor. You need to understand what your options are and explore and make sure that you're feeling really comfortable with how pensions and investments work, how risk works, how things like ethical investing works, and getting to a place where you are confident about where to put that pension share.
And the question I often get is about what, after a pension share, can I pay into the pension? What if my ex-spouse who I've taken a pension share from, can they pay into the pension? What are the rules there about continuing to use that pension? Or is it just something that's sort of frozen in time, you've got to wait until you retire?
If you've taken the pension share away, it's now a new pension. So if you had to move it away from the existing provider, it's now a new pension, brand new pension. You can contribute as and when you want to. And your ex cannot contribute. It's yours. It's in your name. He won't even know where it is, who it's with, what's happening with it. It will be completely private to you. If it has remained with the pension provider that it was with originally, if it's one of these defined benefit schemes, you won't be able to contribute anymore. They will have closed that scheme. And so to have a new contribution, you'd need a separate personal pension. And you can have both running alongside each other.
And does that work the same for lump sums then? Can you explain how they work post pension share?
Do you mean tax-free lump sums?
Yeah, the tax-free lump sum that somebody would be able to take from their pension. How does that work if they've had a pension share?
So you can access 25% of your pension from age 55 as a tax-free lump sum. You should really only be accessing it when you need it. And it isn't really kind of access to capital to kind of have a fun time with. That isn't the aim of that kind of part of your pension. It is still meant to be to support you and help you towards your retirement. So that's a key thing to have in your mind. So if you are over 55 and you have this pension share, you can take your pension share anytime from 55 and your ex will not be aware of it at all. It's kind of in your scheme and you'll be able to access it.
And in terms of the valuations of the pensions, if someone is receiving a pension share and they get their pension credit, it's often difficult to, and I think it's kind of slightly complex, but hopefully I'm sure you can explain it better than I can, to explain to clients what they will get, because what you do get on the pension share is a percentage, isn't it? So when does that figure get crystallized? How does that work? How long does it all take? Which is fundamentally the ultimate $1 million question, is when am I going to get this pension in my own name? Because it's not a quick process. How does that whole process work?
Yeah, it isn't a quick process. So when the decision has been made, your legal team are going to put together a pension sharing annex, and that's going to be sealed by the court. And then that is going to be sent to the pension provider. And the pension provider has up to 4 months to implement that. And they can pick any date in that 4 months to value the pension. And the date that they then value the pension, that's the date that the figure becomes set at. So until they have had the paperwork and the annex to be able to start that process, we don't know exactly how much that value is going to be. And we also don't know what date they are going to pick.
It's a moving target syndrome, isn't it? So it changes quite regularly. So I know clients find it quite difficult, particularly if they've had an actuary report. So it's like, well, it's been valued. This is exactly how much the report says that I'm going to get. I've paid for this report. Why is that going to change further down the line?
And it varies significantly, obviously, in the current markets where the stock market is moving an awful lot. But we're also seeing defined benefit pension values varying huge amounts at the moment. And that's even more worrying because when you have a defined benefit scheme, they're typically higher values. And so you see a more significant change, and it's linked to gilt values, and kind of where we see those changing, we will see some big variations then in pension values. So it can be significant. It isn't one that we can influence in any way other than making sure that on our end we are kind of prompt and efficient. We get the paperwork where it needs to be. There's certainly, in most divorce financial planners practices, we will have a lot of following up, a lot of chasing, a lot of kind of being in touch with these pension providers to say, have you got everything you need? Can you now make the decision?
And if you do have that moving target, just to stress, the court's approach to that is largely that, well, if it goes up, it goes up for both of you. If it goes down, it goes down for both of you. And it's going to be very hard to change those. There's a fairly sort of recent case which dealt with this huge delay when the pension share wasn't implemented for about 3 years, and the value went massively up and then massively down, and it comes all over the place. But the court said, well, you need to crack on and implement it. So it's really key to try and move quite quickly with that, so you can get as much certainty in an uncertain world that you can, isn't it?
Yeah. Was that T versus T?
Yeah.
Is that a fairly recent one? And you're right, it goes both sides, because in that particular case, the husband and the wife had both a case for it going up and the other one going down, and it was just kind of, all we can do is just kind of make sure that we implement, make sure that we take the right steps, we follow up and we chase. It is really difficult if things move, and that is about also understanding how investments work and understanding how risk works. It's really difficult if you have a pot of money that changes and falls in value. If you are also in the context of everything else has fallen in value, we also need to be mindful of that market typically will recover as well. So you will have, yes, you will have received less money, but you will be buying more units for the money you have received. And therefore, you should be seeing the upturn, the following kind of market increase proportionately as well. So we would anticipate it to recover. We would anticipate actually that you would see that bounce back. It's just not the guarantees, and it's just the fear of when it does come through and it is that lower value.
I think that sort of tiptoes into sort of slightly, perhaps this is slightly more legal discussion, but something, in akin to what the court would do if the valuation goes up and down. A real, I think, sort of hot topic issue at the moment in a lot of my cases, certainly, is an approach that the court takes to pensions where they've been pre-acquired. So you have a case where parties have maybe married later in life, and one or both of the parties brings what can be substantial pension wealth into the marriage, and the party bringing that wealth will say, well, I should keep that because it's pre-acquired, it's not a product of the marriage. But actually the way the courts deal with that is that the starting points that need to be met, and because even pensions with huge capital values aren't necessarily going to produce a great deal of income, and when you have that income that is, and you've got parties who are approaching retirement age, that income's got to be met from somewhere, and it doesn't matter about the source of that income. So I think that's a really difficult thing for clients to take on sometimes, is that you may have acquired this pension for years before you marry, but actually the whole pension can be shared. I mean, what are the conversations that you have with clients around that, Ceri? Is that something that can be a big factor?
Yeah, huge factor. I think one of the biggest challenges around divorce is getting every party to the point where they understand what the law says, understand this is the starting point, this is where the law thinks this is fair. And a lot of the difficulty a lot of clients have is kind of this kind of conception around, actually that is something I owned before, so that's not on the table, that's something I've inherited, so that's not on the table. And kind of getting everybody to the point where they understand, okay, this is how the law would look at it, this is what's legally on the table, and now let's decide how it's going to work and what the needs are, etc. With my clients specifically, part of the conversations that I have with them is they will typically have had a conversation with their ex where their ex will have said, here's a spreadsheet of our assets, this is everything we've got, here is 50-50, this is a really great deal, let's not get legal teams, let's not worry about all that court and all that cost, this is the best deal you're ever going to get. And that's where I typically get involved, because a woman, quite rightly, in that situation often doesn't feel like he's got her best interests at heart, and there's a bit of apprehension. And so they'll ring me and they'll say, this is the situation, and I'll look at it, and typically I will say things like you've just said, Matt. I'll say like I'm not a lawyer, but these are the red flags, and this is why you need one. This is why you need to go and get some confidential advice, and they can outline to you kind of whether or not this is in the realms of kind of where they think this will go. And that's, I think, kind of one of the hardest things to do, is kind of get people to a place where they appreciate what is and isn't a marital asset.
Okay, so you referred before when we were talking through things, the importance of looking at what happens in the future and your eye to the end, and this sort of long term view, and especially when you look at the sort of long term performance of the market. Just interested on the timing, looking at things on the long term. When's the best time for you to get involved in the case to look at that? Are you getting in at a very early stage, or do you see clients who they come to you and say, I have this divorce settlement, I need some help in investing it? Just interested about what your advice is to someone who's listening to this and maybe embarking on a divorce process or is partway through it, to see at what stage they should be looking to speak to someone like you.
Early is what I would say. The earlier, the better, to have that expertise on your side all the way through. We talked a lot today about informed choices, and having expertise on your side to be able to visualize how scenarios play out so that you can make the right decisions as you go through. So I would say it is a conversation to be having, if you're male or female, with a financial planner early days, at the same time, if not before, you're talking to your legal teams about what you're thinking of doing. I do get clients who come to me right at the end, typically not from lawyers these days, because I think, as a legal profession, it's really common to get financial planners involved really early these days. So I will typically get people who haven't had much legal support, and I'll get them closer towards the end. And yeah, I do think they miss out on both the legal and the financial support and the expertise on the way through. So the sooner the better. It will mean that you are in a place of strength and be able to make decisions quickly and efficiently and confidently.
How do you map that out for them? What does it look like? You talk about providing them with the picture as to, how things will look moving into the future. How does that look for the client that's coming to you?
So I specifically run a 4-stage program. It's called WISE. And the first step is wellness. And in that one, I'm filling kind of all the financial knowledge gaps my clients might have, because typically they weren't the financial manager in their marriage. So the first step is about making sure they really understand all the assets on the table, that they really understand how their ex is paid. When you're divorcing a CEO, there's some complexities around how they get paid. So they have long-term incentive plans, they have different share options. Just making sure the first step is about, right, do you get it? Like, what don't you get? What haven't you had exposure to? What have you never been involved in? And kind of making sure that that understanding's there. And then the next step is which is all around intent. So exploring what they want their future to look like post-divorce in some depth: home, family, career, lifestyle, where they are now and how they got there, where they want to be, and costing that in a different way that they will with you, because you will do expenditure with them, but I will look at their expenditure from now until age 100 and really think about kind of different timelines when things change, when their children move out of home, early retirement, late retirement, give a lot of consideration to how their costs will change. That work is then put into a cash flow forecasting software. And the software allows us to specifically look at and visually see how money will last. We can see the incomings versus the outgoings. We can see where there are gaps. We can then overlay that with different scenarios they might have in mind, such as, are they going to take a pension share? Are they going to offset? Are they going to downsize? And we can look at that. So that's all around intent. The next stage then is stress test. And this is where, when they start to make offers, or their ex starts to make an offer, and we can run that offer through the software and see if it works, and actually give them some confidence, okay, that would work, or help them be creative. If they're trying to get to a resolution and it doesn't necessarily look like it's going to work, right, how do we adapt things? How can we make this work if they want it to? And then the last step is evolve. And this is about making sure that they're ready to make the financial decisions that they need to, because you often will need to be in a place where you're needing to make some investment decisions. So you need to understand how investments work, charges work, where you need to understand, ethical investing. So that's the 4 stages that I go through. Most divorce financial planners will do the visualization piece. And that's, I think, kind of the really key piece, is to make sure that we can get clients seeing that picture. And male or female, kind of whoever's coming at this, actually being able to sense check what is going to happen and then see what the options look like, is a really sensible step to take.
So do you see clients who have a mismatched expectation as to what they would like from the settlement versus the assets that are there? And what I mean by that is, when you talk about that you go through with clients, how they would visualize their life. If I think for myself, if you ask me those questions, I can come up with all sorts of lovely things that I would like to have as part of my life. And I'm sure that we would have this wonderful spreadsheet that I would be absolutely, ecstatic about. But the reality is that my finances wouldn't fund that lifestyle. So is that ever something that you come up against with regards to sort of running it through the system as to what they want versus actually what they're likely to get? And how do you manage their expectations in that process?
Yeah, absolutely. I think part of managing it is in the questions that I ask when I'm getting them to visualize that part of their life. So I'm not saying, okay, post-divorce, what's the amazing life you're going to have? Where are you going? You're flying first class. I'm not asking those types of questions. What I'm asking is,
very much what a full and beautiful life looks like to them, in conjunction with the life that they've had. So and actually most of my clients, and I would say clients in general, are looking to keep their life as similar as possible. They do tend to reimagine things from having a different priority and kind of a different depth that they approach things. So they don't necessarily want the 5-star holidays anymore, for my clients specifically. But I rarely have clients who are looking to up level. It's about kind of asking the right questions to kind of genuinely look at their proper life, and kind of putting it in the way that you've said, Lisa, as well, so that they understand what we're trying to cost out here. Now, that said, we might do all of that work and we get to a figure. So essentially, the work that you do with a divorce financial planner will ultimately give you a figure. You know, you need X amount of money from this settlement, or X amount per month to fill any gaps, or you need to be earning Y amount for this to work. And that might be completely unrealistic, but we can have that conversation then and actually say, okay, we need to go back, we need to analyze where we are, we need to understand what we can cut back on and how. So most of my clients are fearful that what they're putting down isn't realistic. And so we will start with what do you actually want, and kind of in the basis of reality. And then if we need to, we'll go back. It is a hard question because it steps into legal territory, because I'm not the one at any point who's saying this is what you'll get from a settlement. Like, I don't know the case law. Yeah, I do have exposure to it, but I don't know. And I'm not the one who's going to be saying, right, this is a 50-50 split. And I will always redirect them. And I also get input from the legal teams and say, how much, where, what are we looking at? I'm coming at it from a point of view of, this is the minimum you would need to be able to afford to maintain your lifestyle. And let's sense check that amount against how many assets there are there. We might do that analysis and it comes back that it's like 20% of the assets. We might do that analysis and it comes back and it's 90%. And that actually gives us quite a good steer, and the legal team quite a good steer.
Ceri, this has all been absolutely fascinating. I wonder if you could just leave us with one final point. What is your number one top tip for someone who is about to go through a divorce process, and what they should be doing when it comes to considering pensions?
My top tip is you should get a divorce financial planner or a financial planner. And I know that sounds awful, but it is so true. This is a complex area. You need an expert on your side. If you have pensions of less than 100k total, you might get away without it. But it's rare that you've got pensions with less than that amount these days. And so, yeah, they're a big asset. You need some expertise.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Ceri, for joining us. You can find out more about the work that Ceri does supporting clients at www.willowbrooklfp.co.uk. So that's it for this episode of Stowe Talks. Thanks for listening. If you would like more information on our podcasts, head over to stowetalks.co.uk and please rate, like, share and review where you can.